Ladies and gentlemen, Hebrews and Shebrews, welcome to the Life Podcast. Today we are talking with Zac Bauer. He runs an American Homestead YouTube channel and New to Torah YouTube channel. We're going to talk all about living off-grid, which Zac has done for years. We'll talk about when we first met 8 years ago when I interviewed him for The Way documentary. We'll also talk about why he's looking forward to the end of the world, really just the return of Yeshua, and how that can be a hopeful thing instead of just a scary negative thing, and how you can get your kids to actually not be worried about the future prophetic events, but see how awesome it will be when Yeshua runs the world. I had originally planned to release Zac's interview pretty quickly after we started this podcast, but during the recording of the interview, I made a huge rookie error, and I left this on the screen when I was recording him. So it took a little finagling and doing and learning on my part to be able to pull that out so it looks like this. And I think that is kind of acceptable on at least being able to listen to him without wanting to pull your hair out. So I'm sorry about that, Zac. I've never made that error before, and I hope I never do again. If you love what we're doing, like this video, give it 5 stars somewhere, share it, subscribe, and thank you so much for everything you do and how you support this channel. Without further ado, I give you Zac. Zac, thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome to the Life Podcast.
Thanks for coming out. It's amazing you drove all the way out here.
We had to come and get you on camera. I don't want to do Zoom. I know I'm going to have to do Zoom for a lot of these, but I just wanted to do a trip and
Well, you said it's been 8 years since you've been here before, and a lot's changed, and so I'm glad you made the trip.
Thank you, man. Yeah. Yes, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
You've done a really good job.
You picked a great time of the year when the fall colors are pretty outside and looks great out there.
It's unbelievable driving up here. Man, people just have to see it to believe it.
Yeah. The Ozarks is a very beautiful place.
Will you tell me about making wine? Because I make cider, hard cider, and it's a passion of mine. And I know you make wine. Mm-hmm. Will you tell me what sort of juice, berries, grapes, etc., and how's that going?
Yeah, I've been making wine now. Since we've moved out here, it's one of my passions too. And the more I've learned about it, and even it's the whole connection even to Scripture too, it just really has made me a passionate winemaker. Now I'm not that great. I'm not gonna suppose that I'm some amazing winemaker. I make all these great wines, but I enjoy wine. I enjoy making it. I enjoy the process, and I enjoy the spiritual connection to it. Yeah, it's all about being connected to the land. And so there's a place not far from here where you can pick grapes, and they have 90 acres of different grape varieties. A lot of varieties grow really well in the Ozarks because of the mineral content of the soil. And you want, usually when it comes to wine making and wine growing, grape growing is horrible soils. And we have that. So it's not as good as some of the other soil conditions around the world, like France and Italy and some of those other ones. But Ozarks is a pretty good wine growing region. There's a lot of wineries here, and they produce some pretty good, wines. So anyway, all that to say, I have experimented. I've made peach wine. I've made persimmon wine. I've made different grape varietals, and it's a passion of mine. Yeah, I love it.
How did you make persimmon wine? Because I found a persimmon tree behind my property. I mean, it's one of the only trees on my property.
Yeah, so persimmons don't have a lot of juice. Is that what you?
Yeah, and also aren't they as? I mean, I've tried to wait.
Yeah, you can't. You have to wait. You can't eat them until they're ready. They have to fall to the ground. If you find a persimmon on a tree and you pick it, you're going to regret it. Okay, you need to find it. Wait till it hits the ground. It's soft and mushy, and then it's going to taste almost like candy. But there's not a lot of juice in there. There's hardly any juice. So you have to add water. And so you have to make a slurry and then ferment that. Persimmons come with a great amount of yeast already on the outside. And so if you take a persimmon and you rub it with your finger, you'll see that the yeast rubs off. and that's the natural yeast included with it. Anyway, you can add more yeast, add water, and then you make a slurry, ferment that, and then age that into wine, and you can make wine with it.
Did you like how that turned out? Was it okay?
Yes, I thought it turned out really well.
That's on my list then.
Yeah, it just takes a lot of persimmons.
Do you have more than one tree?
Oh yeah, we have 300 at least persimmon trees here on the homestead. There's lots of persimmons everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, we only have one.
Yeah, they get to be kind of annoying because you're walking around. There's so many more than you can pick, and you're stepping on them as they're falling, and it kind of makes the bottom of your shoes icky.
We have a bunch of maple trees, so we've been doing sap.
Yeah.
So that's really what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, you can make maple syrup, or you can even ferment that.
I've heard about that.
Yeah.
I've never done it, though.
Yeah. Well, it takes 7 gallons. Well, no, I'm sorry. 40 gallons of maple sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup.
Okay.
So it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot of product. And so if you make a syrup and then you ferment that, that's a lot of product that you could have been making something else with.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you're right. It's long. I need a better cooker.
Or find a different sugar source.
Yeah. I know. Well, we have no salt source. If we're talking about this kind of stuff, I'm like, what's a good salt source? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what they did back in the old days was they used to, find salt licks or salt caves or places like that, and that's how they would harvest their salt from. And salt was a very, very valuable commodity. And I've learned that, over time, being out here, like, what would I do if I couldn't get salt anymore? How would I procure salt? Well, you'd have to barter and trade with it, for it. So. Because
it's easiest to get it on the coasts, I guess.
Well, yeah, you can desalinate it. You can basically boil your water until you get salt. That's very easy to do. Celtic sea salt, which is one of the best-selling salts in the world, that's what they do. And it comes through France to come to the U.S., a very popular brand. But here, even in the United States, Redmond's is a really good salt. A lot of people like, and it comes from Utah. They have giant caves there where they mine it out of the ground, and it's a very good salt. Yeah.
My sister's out there in Utah, so.
But even in Arkansas, I think it's in southern Arkansas, eastern Arkansas. There's salt licks down there where people used to mine salt and get salt from.
And there's still, you think there's still salt in there? Or?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where we'd get it. I guess we'd have to, I don't know what, barter, like you said.
Well, you find people who do, and they trade and barter for it, yeah.
Well, what's happened on the homestead since we talked last, like 8 years or so ago? 2015 is when we were here.
Right.
And
so
the place has changed a lot. Maybe we can film.
Yeah, we took you guys on a tour when you guys drove up, and you kind of recognized it, but you knew a lot had changed.
Yeah. There are way more buildings.
Yeah.
Really nice, big Sukkot buildings.
My kids, I think when you were here last time, my youngest was a small child, and a lot has changed. Jamie, as you know, passed away from cancer in 2019, and we have expanded a lot of things here on the homestead, since then and before, since you were here last, and we have different animals now, different types of sheep than what we had, I think, when you were here last. Right now we have sheep on the homestead. We have chickens, and we have quail that we raise. So all are very productive. We make a good amount of money from those, and it's also for our own purposes too, for meat. A lot's changed. A lot of good things, a lot of bad things. It's just, life goes on.
Yes. And the homestead continues.
It does. It does. It continues, and we're doing well. I mentioned to you when you first got here, we just took on a new business, The Perfect Pickler. That my oldest son's going to be running, and it's a website that deals with vegetable fermentation, making your own probiotics. It's a very healthy thing to do. A lot of people are doing that these days, and so we're not sitting idly by. We're full speed ahead.
And you're doing this side business or business for your kind of prepping it for your son to manage and take over. And I'm noticing, like, as we're doing these interviews, I'm reminded that there are so many entrepreneurs in this Torah movement. It's crazy.
Well, it's almost something that you'd have to expect, because you're looking at a group of people who has decided to detach from a system. And if you're going to detach from a system and not do a 9-to-5 job, sit in traffic on your way to and from work, what does that look like? Sometimes it means developing revenue streams on your own, coming up with business ideas on your own, doing things you love. We talked about just setting up on your camera equipment today. You love what you do. It's like you have to. And yeah, I mean, you don't have to, but to enjoy life, you have to. Otherwise, what's the point? And this group of people that you're talking to and that you're, hearing stories from, they're detaching from the system. And so they're trying to find new and better ways to provide for their families that don't involve being attached to the system anymore. And so, yeah, that's something that you see a lot of.
And this perfect pickling will be an interesting one. We'll link to that, whatever links you have. We'll send us we'll put it under there. So, okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about YouTube, if we can.
Sure.
I'm curious. I think people have no idea what it's like to do what you're doing. What would be one thing, one of the most surprising things that people would like? One of the big challenges of doing YouTube stuff. What's something people don't think about?
This episode of the Life Podcast is brought to you by The Way documentary, The Truth, Reformation 2.0 Apologetics book, and Truth Tracks. The Way documentary tells the story of our movement. This is the story of people who were trading Easter ham for Passover lamb and Sunday church for Saturday Sabbath, all in an effort to live like their Savior. It dives into their stories through their own voices and into the history and theology that show how the church got to where it is today. The Truth, Reformation 2.0 is the only book of its kind, an all-encompassing theological treatise that answers every question a mainstream Christian might have about why you want to keep Torah. And finally, Truth Tracks are small comics, beautifully illustrated, that use stories and scripture to remind Christians that once we are saved by grace through faith, we are called to live and do the instructions of Yah, his Torah. If you want to learn more about any of these products, go to thewaydoc.com. That's theway, D-O-C, like documentary.com.
Now, years ago, it was all about the creator, okay? And I think a lot of these networks, NBC, ABC, CBS, they were looking around and like, where's all our audience going? Oh, they're going over to places like Netflix, or they're going to places like YouTube, and we want them. We're losing our audience to these places, and people are watching, actual creators and learning and listening about their lives. And that's more interesting than our scripted content. Are you crazy? We got to get them back. Well, there was no way they could get them back because people are gravitating towards things that are real. That's why all of those, what are those types of shows called, like Survivor and all these other shows that came out, they're called reality shows, right?
Yeah.
People gravitated towards those because until they figured out it wasn't reality, it was scripted also. But YouTube wasn't. It was very much real. You were looking into the lives of other people and what they did, whether it was in their kitchen making recipes or out there chopping wood or whatever. It was real. Well, the networks came in and they basically threw millions and hundreds of millions, tens of millions of dollars towards YouTube. And now YouTube is becoming a network. And that's hard on the creators. And so the money has basically dried up. And so now you have things like Patreon or other different locals or whatever that you can do or bring on sponsors for your channels in order to find a way to make money doing that. YouTube is gearing the audience, taking the audience and focusing the audience on things it wants you to see, which is more networkish type stuff and not so much on the creators. So, and now because of that, you have things like Rumble and other things that are popping up so people can see what's real again. And that's catching on slowly but surely. People want authenticity. And probably the biggest thing about YouTube is realizing that you're in a fight for authenticity. People want to see what you're doing. They want to see that if you're real, and and you don't realize as the audience that YouTube is trying to gear your attention to things that are not authentic. Or if they are, they want you to see the things they want you to see and not the things they don't want you to see, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And it's bad because, then you just have to look harder.
Yeah, you got to do your own research and find the channels that are real and authentic and who don't want to really play the game. And I mean, it just is what it is. That's probably the thing that people don't realize the most about YouTube. People think, oh, you're on YouTube and you've got 200. I've been at the same subscriber count for a year because YouTube won't let new audience see me, for the Homestead channel,
That's insane.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Do you have hopes that will change at YouTube, or have you set your sights on Rumble? And
I think the biggest rallying cry was when Elon Musk took over Twitter. I was like, buy YouTube too, because we're in the same predicament. We're being throttled. We're being censored, and it is what it is. MySpace wasn't at the top of the hill forever. I don't think YouTube will be either. People desire authenticity, and they'll gravitate towards that eventually on their own or with the help of others. Who knows? I
know Musk is doing videos on X now on Twitter, but I mean, it's not the same as YouTube.
It's not the same. And there's no real advertising. There's no real revenue gain. There's no real reason. There's been other platforms that have popped up, but there's no real reason to draw a creator over there. There's no real revenue gain or anything like that. YouTube, that was one of the biggest drawing cards of YouTube, is that I can get ads and I can, earn a little bit of money, and you can build on that and expand. And YouTube would be like, okay, we understand what your audience is looking for. Let's help throw more stuff related to you and your content towards that audience, and new people would find you, but that doesn't happen anymore.
That is terrible, man.
Well, it's the way it is. And it's like, you maintain a positive attitude, you continue to work hard, you continue to produce good content. And, one of the things that I get the most from a book like Proverbs is that, you work hard and you will be taken care of, you will be provided for. And the Father's always been, has always given his provision to us. And so we'll keep working hard, and it'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do what he calls you to do, I guess.
Right.
Make the podcast, right. Even though who knows what happens with YouTube. It's like, I'm talking to the wrong people.
Well, we've tried to mitigate some of these things. Like we're uploading videos to Rumble, and we have our own website at AmericanHomestead.com. And so it's like there are places where people can find us other than YouTube, and you have to do that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So, all right, and you on American Homestead, you tell people a ton of stuff. Mm-hmm. And because you've done so much of it here, and we've saw some of that, in person. So, okay, if someone, what are 3 things that people should do to make themselves more self-sustainable? If you had a top 3, I'm sure you've done this, right. But I'm curious, and I'd like the audience to see
I think the number one thing has been the same all these years. Number one thing we always tell people, and it sounds a little simple, but it's just to start cooking. Start cooking, because today our world is so full of processed foods and junk. If you can just go home and start cooking with whole ingredients, that's an amazing preparedness technique and skill. It's an amazing homesteading technique and skill. It's going to prepare you for so many things later on down the road. I'm often reminded of things like this when I always go back to Karate Kid. Wax on, wax off, and sand the floor, and paint the fence, right? He was teaching this kid karate. The kid wants to learn karate, but he's teaching him the basics. He's teaching him muscle memory. And the kid's like upset at the end, like, why are you not teaching me karate? And he's like, no, you realize I've been teaching you it all along. Sand the floor, paint the fence, all of wax on, wax off, right? This is all basics. Start cooking. But do you realize how many people don't do that anymore in our culture today? You go into a lot of people's houses and they have nothing in the fridge. They have nothing in the cupboards. And they order out and they go through drive-thrus, most of their life. It's like, go back to the food that your grandparents and great-grandparents would recognize, and begin there. Because the reality is, if you move out to a place like where I live in Homestead, the culture shock is going to be so intense. You're not going to last. You're not going to make it, because we're 30 minutes away from the nearest gas station. How are you going to go to restaurants out here without spending all your money on gas? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Start cooking again.
I was curious how often you went into town to like just go have dinner or go have lunch.
Very rare. I mean, it's like, I mean, we do it sometimes, but normally if I'm out traveling, because I have to go to town, there's a town and then there's a bigger city where I go to get certain things that I can't get in the small town. So at certain times I'll have to go out and I may grab something on the way or whatever. But it's like, even then, it's like everything is so bioengineered and Bill Gatesified, if I could say that, and not get censored.
Oh, wow.
It's like, you know,
I'm giving up on that at this point.
Right? I'm like, it's just like, I don't trust the food out there. It's like I have to be very careful about the things I eat, even when I'm out, you know, because my kids, if I'm taking my kids with me, it's like, I want my kids to reproduce one day. It's like, I think everything out there today is meant to keep our kids infertile and sterile. And anyway, all that to say, not to go down a bunch of conspiracy theory rabbit trails, but my opinion is like, yeah, start cooking. If you want to get into homesteading, what's the first thing you do? Start cooking. Other things you can do, I always say this phrase is, when you push preparedness to its logical conclusion, you will always end up on a homestead. Okay. I think I don't know if my kids are going to come in the house or not.
It's okay.
Okay. I think they're ran around the house.
Oh, okay.
So what I mean by that is, people say, well, how can I, people will get into different aspects of preparedness, and all of those will lead to homesteading when you push them to their logical conclusion, meaning like, well, what's the best way to have a sustainable food source? What's the best way to have, a sustainable or a shelter long-term in a term during a collapse, or, prepare for power outages, or, water, where can I acquire water? Having a homestead is your best way to prepare for, eventualities that we all know are probably coming. So when you push preparedness to its logical conclusion, you will always end up on a homestead. So that's another thing I tell people to think about when they're getting into homesteading.
Because you got to be able to make something out of the land.
Yeah, well, and that would probably lead me to my third thing, is being a producer. We're getting into an age where it's my opinion that Mystery Babylon is the United States. Why does it say the merchants of the world cry out? We're the biggest consumer society on planet Earth. Everything we do and involve ourselves with in our modern age is about consuming things that other people or other merchants have produced and sold to us. We are a consumer society. We're not a manufacturing society anymore like we used to be. So for you to mitigate what might be coming, especially on a homestead, is to produce things. People say, well, Zac, how am I going to earn a living on a homestead? Stop thinking in terms of a career. You weren't supposed to have a career. This is like a modern 20th century, 21st century thing where I get a career, I go to college, I learn a skill, and that's my career until I die. But homesteaders have always had multiple revenue streams. This year, at this time of year, I'm going to make money by selling hay. This time of year, I'm making money by selling eggs. This time of year, I'm making money by selling cattle. This time of year, I'm making money by selling my produce. Whatever, it's just you have multiple revenue streams. And meanwhile, I also knit and I crochet different little things that I sell to my neighbors, whatever. They had multiple revenue streams, and that's the way it's always been throughout history. And I think we've lost touch of that. Over time, we come to this idea where I have to get my career and then I'm set. And then I'll have my 401k when it's all over, and that'll sustain me. But that's not historically how people have always survived.
And there's also the digital sphere that you can reach out into and produce in that. I mean,
gives you more opportunities. And I think some of those doors are closing based on censorship and based on, like, for instance, a lot of people, I made my first mullein tincture. It's actually sitting over there on the counter. My first mullein tincture. It's medicinal, this year. I made different medicinals throughout the years, but I've never made mullein. It's so many. You can't talk about things like that. Etsy will remove you from their website if you talk about things like that. YouTube will remove you if you start talking about the intricacies of different medicinal plants and things like that, because the pharmaceuticals, Google has its own pharmaceutical wing now. Did you know that?
No.
Google owns YouTube. So they don't allow you to talk about things like this.
And that's good for your lungs, isn't it, mullein?
Oh, yeah. All kinds of things.
Katie has made something like
all kinds of things, yeah. You can do all kinds. It's lungs, all kinds of stuff.
So am I going to have to cut all this part out for YouTube?
I'm not going into any details about what I'm doing and treatments, right? So I think it'll be fine.
I'm going to need to consult with you. What do I need to cut?
Yeah, no, I think you're okay. I'm keeping things general as a way to be safe.
Isn't it terrible? See, this is the problem. When people have to self-censor, it does limit,
right?
Whatever. It limits a conversation. It limits everything.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Yeah.
But, that's too bad. At least there is X, there is Spotify, etc.
There's ways for you to still get these things out and talk about them. You just have to be careful. And I think that door will close even more where you'll have to be more careful. But it's like the more freedom is suppressed, the more people tend to flow like water and find outlets for it. So that's historically been true as well. I say often on my channels that history is my favorite topic because by studying history, you can see where other people have been, the mistakes they've made, how they've gone around different obstacles and things in their life that have, stood in their way. And you can do that as well, or find different workarounds that are similar. So.
Man, the whole censorship thing's so crazy.
We live in interesting times, right?
Now, so I've thought about this. I've thought, what if, because, the common thought is things will you look back in our history and you've seen just the perversity, quote unquote, spiraling downward. If you even look at the history of TV and movies, you see how it was kind of wholesome before 1950-ish. And then it continues to progress to a more and more gross point.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it seems to follow that'll continue until we're just in whatever horrible state we are, and then Yeshua comes back. Now, have you ever thought, this is a thought I had when I heard that Jordan Peterson was doing this consortium about trying to see a good version of the future, like the opposite of what Klaus Schwab and the rest are doing at their conference. He wants to create this conference and let's imagine good and productive and human kind of society.
Yeah.
Do you have any hope that there will be a bump of that before it continues, or do you think we're just on the continual slope?
I don't know. I mean, that to me, I could see something like that coming about because of all of this insanity that we're on right now. But that to me I'd be worried. I'm skeptical of everything. I'm suspect of everything. And Jordan Peterson, in my opinion, is just a word salad chef. He says a lot. He says a lot of amazing, fancy words. But I don't know. You mentioned 1950. Let's just go with that.
Yeah.
Mentioned 1950. Things are wholesome. 1960. This is something I mentioned on my channel. What happened? Do you remember what happened in 1960?
The sexual revolution and the pill.
Well, okay.
That's where my mind
right.
goes.
But that resulted. That was good. That happened. Yes, correct. But 1960, Supreme Court, Madalyn Murray O'Hair, removed the Bible out of schools for curriculum. Okay, and it goes downhill because 1960. I mean, there's still a lot of wholesome stuff going on there. It was the late 60s when the 60s were really rolling. That you had all of this free love movement, all of Woodstock and all the other stuff and all the pot smoking, stuff really got crazy. But 1960, Madalyn Murray O'Hair, Supreme Court, removed Bible out of schools. And so children are no longer taught in the schools to love your neighbor as yourself. Thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, the 10 Commandments, simple basic things that you would teach to school children. Well, now you have generations upon generations who have never heard those things. And where are we at? It's just getting worse and worse and worse. And when you try to mention to people, we should go back to those things, they recoil in horror. Well, that's not what caused that. That's not what. But think of it. Look at it from a bigger, when in doubt, zoom out. Look at it from a broader picture. 1960, things started to go downhill when we took the Bible out of schools. We stopped teaching our children. How many verses do I have to quote you about children and how we are to teach them from Scripture? So we, I think, brought on a huge curse of disobedience by doing that. And our nation is now paying the price fully, and it's just going to get worse. Again, being Mystery Babylon, maybe. That's just my horse in the race. If I was a betting man at Churchill Downs at the Kentucky Derby. Are we the Mystery Babylon? Personal opinion, yes, because we're the biggest consumer in the world, and the merchants of the world will be the ones that cry out because their cash cow just fell over dead. And so how that ends up eventually happening, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see and watch the show.
One question that Katie always brings up is, okay, we have the foreknowledge that we get from the Bible prophecy, which is something that the rest of the world doesn't have, which is good. It can be good. Can be good. Yeah. How do we help our kids to want to be inspired and to pursue a normal life until whatever happens? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do we make sure that they don't get depressed or dissuaded or not wanting to go find a mate or whatever? She's always like, Luke, we need to concentrate more on that. And so, okay, I see the point. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't, there's a lot of ways I could go down that road. I don't know which way to go down the road. Repeat the question again.
All right. So do we protect them from basically imminent doom, or do we let them in on it? And also at the same time, do we hedge that with something? Do we say, okay, sure, we kind of read the Bible, we kind of have the game plan to some extent. We don't have like a really hard timeline, or not everyone does. I mean,
all right. So I did a video on this, I think not that long ago, maybe a year ago, I guess. When your kids are of age, like my kids are, I have an 11-year-old and a 17-year-old. And I tell them, I said, listen, because some of them, it's easy. I've heard this before from parents that my teenagers or my kids get depressed because, what's it all for? I want to get married one day. I want to have kids. I want to go have a job. I want to have a career. I want to go to school. I want to do this, do that. And now you're telling me it's all going to be over? Well, that's really depressing, Mom and Dad. and I show them all of the Bible verses where we're going back to the kingdom. Okay. He's bringing us back to the land. And from there will be children born. There will be families that are raised. There will be vineyards that are pruned and cut and planted. You're going to have jobs. People are going to have jobs. People are going to have things to do. You're going to have lives to live. People, I think, I grew up in the Baptist church, and it was kind of depressing because my parents, because they were telling me since a little age, little kid, well, when Jesus comes back one day, all we're going to do is sit at the throne and sing. Well, that sounds great, but what else are we going to do? Because I don't like singing all that much, so it's like, I don't have a great voice. And, I think I'd rather do some other things too. I mean, is that all heaven's going to be? That's really not the greatest. But when you tell kids that, it's like, well, people have wants and desires and goals and ambitions and passions. Where does all that go? All of that will continue. And when I explain that to my kids, they're like, oh, you mean there's things I'm going to look forward to in the kingdom? There's things I'm going to be doing? Yes. The Father created us to also be creators and to be doers and to have imaginations and to do all these things. He just didn't make us to be robots. And so when we bring us back to the kingdom, if you read the verses, we're going to be planting vineyards. We're going to be building homes. We're going to be doing all of these things, and it's all going to be in praise to the Father as being, and the biggest praise we can give him is our obedience. He's going to have a people who finally desire to be obedient. That's what he wanted all along, And so we're going to be doing all those things. And so that's what I try to tell my kids. Now, as far as the world goes right now, there's a reason why I've taught my children never to ride a motorcycle. Okay. And it's because for a year, I worked as an armed security guard at Barnes Hospital, downtown St. Louis, level 1 trauma center. And I saw a lot of motorcycle accidents when I worked in that ER. I was out of the Army and they hired me on as an armed security guard that worked the night shift down there. Now, if you know anything about the Central West End in downtown St. Louis, it's like Beirut.
I think we went through some of there.
It's like Gaza City right now. So it's like, I saw lots of stuff. And motorcycle accidents far outnumbered vehicle accidents. And so I tell my kids, Do you see? I show them these things and I tell them, I saw what recklessness can get you. And I've equated that back. Now, I'm not telling anyone on watching this thing that you can't ride motorcycles. You do what you want. But for me, my house, we're not doing that. Anyway, but, listen, when you see the results of wickedness in our world, point that out to your kids. I know people who will go to fellowships and for certain Torah portions, they'll stay home because they don't want their kids exposed to certain Torah portions. That's the wrong answer. Expose your children. Let them see the results of disobedience. Let them see the results of wickedness, because the result is always the same. Wickedness leads to depravity and leads to hurt and brokenheartedness and all the things that the Bible tells us. Let your kids see that. Let your kids see the things in this world where people are hurt and broken. One of the ways, my sheep, you can probably hear the sheep on camera. They're just passing through. Outside the window.
It sets the tone. It's good, man.
But you wonder why that prisons are the best place to share the gospel? Because that's where people are the most broken. Have you ever heard that? Have you ever been involved in a prison ministry? Prisons are the greatest place to share the gospel because so many people are at their lowest, they're at their brokenness, and that's where the gospel can take root. Psalms 19:7. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. Okay. I look at the law as like a plow. It goes in deep and turns the soil over so that you can plant in it. The law breaks us. It shows us what sin is, so that once we know what sin is and the brokenness that sin causes, we can repent. And now the Lord, the Father, can come in and begin a new creation in us. It's the same way with the gospel and in life. Never keep your children away from seeing the wickedness and brokenness of sin and its results. And I think that's that testimony. Every time I see things in the world, I show my kids, look at this. And so that they can see the result of sin and then understand when they get to a certain age and they're encountering these things for themselves, they can make the decision then and there to turn away from it or to indulge in it. And your kids are going to have to make that decision. You can't hold their hand all throughout life. So you let them see the wickedness of sin, the results of it, and then they'll make a decision one day.
Maybe that's one of the great evils of some fictional films. It removes the consequences from the sin.
Yes.
It doesn't show you the consequences.
Yeah. I mean, how many movies can you watch these days where it's like, what the main characters are doing is wrong, but the film is shot in such a way that you're actually rooting for them. By the
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, really, I'm rooting for a bunch of robbers and thieves. But that's the way it is these days. It's just sin, the great deception. No matter, because people have offered up different suggestions on what the great deception will be. The great deception has always been, what is sin? Keeping you away from what real sin is. All the way back to the garden. Hath God said? ? Did he really say? Is that really wrong? Is that really a sin? That's always been the deception from the very beginning, and that's what it'll be at the end too. What is sin?
And that's one thing that, the Torah has returned to us, is the definition of sin.
Right.
And so that's something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any off-grid prepping advice or homesteading advice specifically for Torah observant people?
Stay away from goats. I see all these people in the Torah movement, they come into homesteading and they get goats. And they're like, oh, look, they're so cute. I mean, goats are cute. Everything's cute when they're small, and bouncing around. But, I told you when you came out here, I was like, I've had goats on 2 different occasions, or I've been around goats on 2 different occasions. And I'll never do it again. I have sheep. Goats are like drunk teenagers who have found the keys to daddy's liquor cabinet. They get up every day and say, what can I break today? And there's a reason why at the end of time, he separates the sheep from goats. So if you're into homesteading, you're into Torah, I understand you want to have an animal that's clean that you can raise for meat or for milk or whatever. Find a sheep variety that works for you. And I think heritage breed sheep, different heritage breeds are the best ones for you. The ones you're going to have it easy. They're more hardy. You're going to have the easier time. But stay away from goats. Unless you like it when you come outside in the morning and a goat's standing on top of your car, then stay away from goats.
How much meat do you get from a sheep? Is it similar to a deer? Or
it depends on the breed. Depends on, what you're feeding it, what time of year you're butchering. You try to butcher in the fall and winter. The heritage breed are going to be smaller. That's why commercial breed, they're bred to be commercial breed. They're fatter. They produce more meat. They produce more wool. But you need drugs literally to keep them alive. They're literally drugged up. You have to drug them every 30 days to keep them alive. But they produce a lot of meat and they produce a lot of wool.
No, that's horrible.
Yeah.
I don't blame you doing that.
I tried to raise, when we first moved out here, I tried to raise commercial breed sheep. Naturally, doing natural dewormers and no drugs, and they died one after the other, left and right. And eventually I'm like, we got to stop this. And so I had someone pulled me aside who was much wiser than me and said, Zac, you need to raise heritage breed sheep. And if you want to raise them that way. So you get less meat, but you get sheep that actually don't die on you.
Now, okay, here's an interesting thing. You didn't grow up on a homestead, right? You grew up in St. Louis, is that right?
Yep, South St. Louis, yeah.
And so when you didn't have a lot of this knowledge that you're now giving to people, right? You didn't grow up on a farm, and the old farmers are having their meetings, and they're teaching each other this stuff.
Yeah.
What advice, again, do you have for people that they're in the position you were in way back? How do they find this stuff out? I guess YouTube is such a great
YouTube is a great resource. Learn from others. You're gonna have successes and you're gonna have failures. Just roll with the punches. Try to learn as much as you can from the old timers in your area. I remember I was growing sorghum. I was growing corn out here. Growing corn in my garden, and I was getting worm issues. It just wasn't growing very well. Soil condition wasn't right. You can make the soil however you want over time. But I was frustrated, and I had an old timer, and he told me, he says, Zac, this is not Iowa. If you want corn, go live up there. If you want to grow things that have always grown here, grow sorghum. There's other things you can grow. This has always been cattle country. Do the things that work well in your area and find the old timers, the people who've been doing it forever, and ask them what they think. Apple trees don't grow well here. Up north, apple trees grow great, but peaches, pears, things like that do better here than apples do. So it's just, you learn what works and you go with it. But it takes time, and you'll save yourself a lot of pain if you talk to the old timers.
Where do you find? They all will talk to you too.
The elders, they'll love talking to you. They hang out at the feed store, like around here. It's funny, like they hang out at the city gates, like the elders, like they talk about in the Bible. Around here, those are places like the feed stores, the hardware stores. There's usually in the small towns. There's a sitting area where there's a few 4 or 5 grandpas who come in, drink their coffee, and talk about old times and talk about solving all the problems in the world. Talk to those guys; they know what they're doing.
That's good advice. That's good advice. So, all right, I'm curious if we could go back to Greenhorn, Zac, before you came into doing the homesteading. Well, first, I guess, what came first, Torah or homesteading?
Torah.
Okay. Is there any connection between those two?
Yeah, I think, Brad Scott, who I'm sure you've talked to before in the past, he talked about this a lot. How once you understand Torah and you understand the Father's perfect plan for his creation, it goes back to what Brad was talking about, a house, a wife, a husband, a child, a farm, a piece of ground, all of these things, these are natural. And I have a lecture that I would give sometimes. It's called the Returning to the Agricultural Roots of the Hebrew People, because that's how we were supposed to be. The Hebrew people were always an agricultural people. They were warriors also, but they were agricultural people. And we've distanced ourselves from a lot of that. And so the greenhorn Zac, had a lot to learn. I did not know a lot of things, and I made a lot of mistakes, and tried a lot of newfangled things that just didn't work. And so I had to learn some things, and, hopefully I've helped some people along the way, as I've learned. But, experience and failure are your biggest teachers.
When was there a moment when you decided, okay, I want to move and have a homestead? I want to get out of...
Yeah, 2008, the financial crisis. When that happened, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we survived this. Because I thought, mathematically, we were doomed at that point. And the only thing that saved us was the printing of dollars. Quantitative easing is what they called it. And, but who thought that they would do that? Again, you go back through history, and a lot of people have done that. They just call it different things. We called it quantitative easing. But it was just printing. Money printer, go burr. And that's what happened. And that's the result that we have today. So, it was back then, we were like, we got to get out of the city. Me and my wife were like, we got to get out. And so we looked at some different options, ideas. My wife's parents, Jamie's parents, liked the idea as well. They wanted to come with us. My late wife, Jamie, she grew up in Papua New Guinea. And so she was used to living primitively, and so were her parents. And so this was almost kind of like a natural jump for us to get into a place like this and do this. And it was an adventure. And I think Tim he'll often say that, why not one more adventure? And so people are like, why are you at your age doing something like this? And that's his answer. Why not one more adventure? And it's been an adventure. And there's been good times and there's been bad times, blood, sweat, and tears. But it's been an honor to do that with them, and I love it.
That's so cool. Mm-hmm. Tim, when we got here, he was out there cutting. He was out there building the shed. Yeah, the next building.
Yeah, most of the things on this homestead he has built. Yeah,
he's
with his own two hands. Yeah,
that's so cool. Now, all right, and this we don't have to keep in. We don't, but we could ask: will people see you again on New to Torah? Maybe.
At some point, maybe. We'll see.
Okay. Yeah. So, when someone comes into Torah for the first time, what's some advice you would give them, and what is advice you would tell them to ignore that people will give them? You could just do one of those if you want. What advice should they ignore, maybe, or
start at the beginning of the book is where I would tell them to start. The advice I would give them, and read it all the way through as one story. Don't start at the book of John, which is usually what the Christian church would tell you to do. You're saved. You want to read the Bible? Start at John. No, the New Testament's not going to make sense if you start there. You don't go into a movie after it's halfway played through in the theater. You walk into the theater at the beginning of the movie. Start with the book at the beginning. So that would be what I would tell people who are new.
That's good. Mm-hmm. And should they not do anything that they might want to do?
Well, I understand that there's a narrow path and there's a ditch on either side. Be wary of either side of the ditch. There are some people who they're in the Christian church and they hear and learn about the commandments, and then they start to cross over, which is a term you'll often hear, and then they'll land on that other side of the ditch and get into a whole bunch of traditions of men from other people, from other points of view, and consider that as the way to go. I think that that middle road, search out that middle road. Mm-hmm. Listen, if you avoid the traditions and doctrines of man, you're going to be, head over heels beyond whatever else anyone's at already anyway, because people love following the traditions and doctrines of man.
I remember when we did the last interview, you had told your mom that you were doing this, and her reaction was you're in a cult, and what's life been with her? Has she still think the same thing, and the rest of your family, or?
I don't know what my parents think. They've recently moved into Huntsville, where we live now in the Ozarks. They moved about 30 minutes away. I think crime got so bad in the city. I've been telling them for years to get out. I think they finally saw it, the writing on the wall that this is not a good place to be. And so they moved down here, and that's good too, because I consider it an honor to take care of them, and that when they get old, and it's a way to honor my parents. But as far as the Torah stuff goes, I think they still think I'm a little bit crazy. They don't understand and see the things that I see and believe, but that's fine. We still get together, and it's good that they can be close to their grandkids. And, my life has been crazy over the last few years, and I don't know what I think some people, when they see, okay, you're doing this Torah thing, your life should be perfect, but that's not the way life is for anyone. And so they wonder why it's not perfect. Well, it's probably because you're going down a wrong path or whatever. I don't know. I just have to be focused, be intentional with what I believe in my faith, and my testimony will bear itself out. I've gone through some crazy times in life, and I think people have worried that my faith would be challenged. It has not been. My faith is very strong. I know that there is a God. It is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he sent his son, and his sacrifice is where my hope is in my eternity. So other than that, I'll let that be my faith, and it's not weakened at all.
I talked to John about something similar. He brought it up about having Parkinson's, and how when that happened, it happened, I think, after he came into Torah. And so
yeah,
I think he had a hard time at first understanding all that, but then he realized that by creating this company that he created, reversing his symptoms and pausing them, and then helping hundreds of people around the world with this thing that he's created, he finally, maybe that's what it took for him to realize, okay, this is a challenge that Yah needed me to have. And
right.
I'm paraphrasing what he said, but
yeah. No, I heard him say this before. Yeah, absolutely. You're faced with your own mortality. What are you going to do with that? Because it's a point of once for a man to die, it says. We don't get to choose when that's going to be, and so who are we to say and argue with the Father over that time period? You get what you get. What are you going to do with the time you get? What are other people going to think about the time you had? And so go from there. You're either going to be destroyed by it, or you can be uplifted and encouraged by it. And I have hopefully been uplifted and encouraged by it. I've lost my wife to cancer, and as Psalms 103 says, the grass withers and the flower fades, and no man remembers, but he remembers. And so I just have to trust that he will remember. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true. Do you have thoughts about this movement as a whole? Like, where at this point, just because 8 years later or whatever, are we headed in a good direction? Are things going crazy? What's going on?
I tell everyone what should we do as a movement, and my answer is, again, back to the same as Brad Scott would say: pray for discernment. I think there was a lot of wisdom in that direction. Pray for discernment. We're going through some crazy times in this world, and I think it's only going to get worse. But where the movement's going, I'm not really worried about that, because I think the Father's doing exactly what he needs to do. Okay, I believe in the last days he's going to bring his people out on a second Exodus, just like it says. Okay, and there's not going to be a rapture. No one's going to escape the show. We're all going to get tickets. Those tickets are going to get punched. The Father, when he does amazing things, he likes the widest audience or the largest audience possible. Why? To proclaim his glory. He wants everyone to notice, just how magnificent and powerful he is, because he is God. And so you think you're going to get out of the sea in this show? You're not. You're going to see the show. There's no rapture. It's not going to happen. And so if we're living in those last days, like I think we are, and he's bringing a remnant out, like it says he will do in numerous places, the remnant will be what it is. And nothing I say or anyone else can say is going to stop that or make it change course. That's one of the reasons why I see these Christian critics who look at the Torah and Hebrew roots movement. There's no leader. There's no one leading this thing. There's no set doctrine. Of course there's not. We already have a leader and we already have a doctrine. It's Yeshua the Messiah and the Torah. And newsflash, they're one and the same. It's like, we don't need any of that. You can have all your leaders, you can have all your doctrines and your, statements of faith and all. I don't need any of that. I've got it all. He's already given it to me. So where are we headed as a movement? I'm not worried because he's directing it. He's leading it. So let him do so.
Yeah, it would make sense that the movement would continue to grow until he returns.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he started this. He'll finish it. We talked about this before, all these different congregations forming all around the country of Torah people or even around the world. It's amazing. It can only be from the Father who's doing that. He's rebuilding a nation. You have these giant movements afoot. And people who are coming here, I've met so many people who have never heard of Zac Bauer, John Sherman, or Brad Scott, or Steve Mutria, or anybody else, and no other personality. They're here because the Father led them here. They believe that the Father was leading them here. And we'll wait and see what that purpose is.
Can we talk just for a little bit about the second Exodus pragmatically? Yeah. Can we talk about okay, let's couple prepping with second Exodus. Uh-huh. Let's say someone just does live in the suburbs or whatever, name wherever, somewhere that's not a homestead, but they are watching and waiting and maybe they're taking care of their parents, whatever they got to do. Yeah. So what should they do if they see like you said, off camera, pillar of fire somewhere, and it's like, all right, time to go. What would be, have you thought about this? And,
yeah.
Okay, what's practical steps?
If I'm average Joe American, but I've discovered Torah and I understand the greater Exodus is going to happen, or maybe I don't, and I see a pillar of fire show up somewhere, I'm heading towards that pillar of fire. I'm going towards that pillar of fire, and there ain't nothing going to stop me from getting there, unless they kill me. Because I understand how the Exodus is going to play out. I've read the scriptures. I've read Jeremiah 23, Jeremiah 16, Isaiah chapter 4, Isaiah chapter 11, so many others that talk about this event. It's the most talked about event in your Bible, Old Testament or New Testament. It's going to happen. Okay, Deuteronomy 30, first 4 verses. So many. If I see a pillar of fire somewhere, I'm going. That's where I would head. And how much time you take to convince those around you to come with you, that's kind of on you. Because here's what I see in Revelation, where it talks about the woman who escapes to the wilderness. I believe that's us. That's the bride. And the dragon, just like Pharaoh, could not get to the woman. So what does he do? The dragon turns around and goes to make war with the remnant of her seed, those who do not, the ones he can get to. Because I don't think everyone's going to escape out of this. I think you have a limited amount of time. When you see it, it's time to go. The reason I live off where I live is because I know hard times are coming. I don't know how much hard time that's going to be until, the Exodus begins to kick off. So it's a mathematical certainty that this economy is going to collapse. I know history. It's happened many times before. There's no stopping that boat from sinking. So I set myself up years ago, 2008, again, the financial crisis. I've got to get to a place where I can weather that storm as best as possible. Okay, until these other things come to a place where I can escape and go to. So yeah, I tell people all the time, I'm not planning on staying here. If I see a pillar of fire, I'm leaving here. I hope there's a pillar of fire nearby, but if not, I'm going wherever that is.
And do you have anything ready for that? I mean, would you bring like a backpack?
Go bags. I mean, whatever. Because what happened the first time? The Father provided all the needs of those who showed up. I don't need anything. Once I get there, water will be provided for. Hopefully we don't murmur and complain about it like last time. Food will be provided. Again, hopefully we don't murmur and complain about it like last time. Everything will be provided. Your shoes won't wear out. Your clothes won't wear out. You just got to get there.
Wow. So even if you have no bag, you have nothing, you can go. And
hopefully, yeah, everything will be provided for at that point.
Wow.
But until that point, what do you do? Because the world's going down the toilet. You may need something to feed your family with until then. That's why we've prepared the way we have,
So maybe that's the line between prepping and faith, like knowing that you're taking care of what you can take care of and then you have faith that he will take care of you when
Yeah.
nothing.
At a certain point in time, I'm going to have to hand the keys over. I can only drive this boat as long as I possibly can. But, Noah had to have some forethought. He said, go build a boat. Okay, well, I put food on the boat. I mean, we don't know how many details were given to Noah when he built that boat. Some of the things he had to do himself. He had to come up with himself. How much hay to put in, food, provender, or whatever for the animals and for himself and for his family. But, you got to be smart about it. I can read a history book and know where we're going historically. And not only that, but countries and governments who have been wicked throughout the past, they've never succeeded in their endeavors. They've always collapsed because that's what wickedness brings. It brings curses. Okay, so just that alone, I know this country's in for some hard road and some hard times. So I'm going to prepare for that. The days of going to a McDonald's and going through a drive-thru to get your easy food, those days are numbered. So you better learn to cook, going back to what we talked about before.
And interestingly, maybe it'll be healthier.
Probably, yeah. Most assuredly.
So to circle back around to what we said about kids and how to make sure they have a good, balanced understanding of the world they're living in and overlaying the Bible prophecy on that. It seems to me, because I wanted to touch on this again, it seems to me that in some Christian communities, they're like, it's the end times, like end of the world. And after end of the world, there's really no thought put on what happens after that. It's like, it's just a black wall. And after that, it's like, it's just in the hands of God. Who knows? We're all dead.
Yeah.
Or everything goes bad. But what it sounds like you're telling your kids is end of the world as we know it is really just beginning of this 1,000-year reign of Yeshua. And it's really something we should be excited about.
Right, exactly. He's coming. He's going to rule and reign for 1,000 years. I'm looking forward to that. That sounds like a vacation to me. I mean, yeah, you're still going to work. You're still going to you're going to live life. But we're going back to the kingdom. That's the Exodus. You're going to go back to the kingdom. What are you going to do when you get there? We're going to live and, live with him. Live with our Messiah. The line of David. We're going to live with him. For 1,000 years. Sounds great.
And Hebrews calls it a vacation. They call it, all these men look forward to a Sabbath that they never had.
Yes, it's a Sabbath that humanity has never seen. Can you imagine 1,000 years with no war and no toil, no. I mean, there's going to be, obviously, I still think you're going to be planting vineyards. It says so. That takes time and work and effort, but it's like you're going to produce. The land will produce. You're going to receive the fruits of production. That sounds great. That sounds fantastic. And the other nations are going to look at this nation and be like, how come they get all their blessings and the fruits, bountiful harvest and all of this stuff? It's because they have this king and they're obedient. And they're going to learn to be obedient. We're going to be a witness to the rest of the world. Because the reason we're a witness is because we have all these things, all of this blessing.
If we let our imaginations run a little, like, we think in terms usually in this world of finite life, we die, and then, we'll go to heaven or whatever. But if we're really thinking of Yeshua returns, there will be 1,000 years where we live with him, what should we be working on? Like, what should we be trying to form ourselves into? Basically, what are the skills and aspects of our personality that we can take with us?
You mentioned wine earlier, right? Most of us who are in this movement, all we want to do is serve our king. We want to serve our king and we want to serve our God. I think it would be great to be the Messiah's sommelier. I mean, it says, I will not drink from this cup until I drink it with you anew in the kingdom. Someone's got to grow those grapes. Someone's got to have that vineyard. Can I have that job? I'd like that job. How do I get hired for that job? Where can I put my resume? Well, study to show yourself approved. Do you know anything about grapes? Do you know anything about wine? Do you know anything about the harvest and the pruning and all of this stuff? It might be good right now to learn some of those things. I know people who like to think of themselves as being able to serve in the temple one day, or to do different things, whatever. Are you learning anything about that now? Are you studying to show yourself approved? Maybe instead of getting into Monday Night Football, maybe instead of getting into the latest thing with the Kardashians or whatever, start, learning about Bible things and Bible ways and doing them and practicing them. How much of your audience has ever even fermented their own grapes, or bottled their own wine? I would probably suspect very few. And so it's like, once you learn these things, you can open up a whole new world of possibilities and opportunities. I think we're going to be drinking wine in the kingdom. So if that job's available, I would like the sommelier job. I would like to bring that cup to my Messiah one day. That would be great.
That would be fun. Well, is there anything else you would like to add at all? Like, would you like to say anything to people? Anything I forgot to ask?
I mean, I don't know. It's just, there's a lot really going on in the world today. And I think it's easy for people to get unfocused and get discouraged and worry. Worry is a huge one. It's so much fear. There's really nothing to fear. There's got to be a resurrection one day. You have to have your hope. It's appointed once for a man to die. None of us are going to get out of that ticket being punched. So keep your hope where it's supposed to be. Keep your hope in Messiah and enjoy the show. Enjoy the time with your families, And then at the same time, while you're here, put yourself to the plow, witness to the brokenhearted, feed the poor, feed the hungry and clothe the naked. Get involved in a ministry, get involved in a food bank. People I've never, and I don't try to brag or try to set myself apart from other ministries or people out there who have done these things, but I've never had a PayPal button on my website. And people email, Zac, how can I send some money to help your ministry or whatever? You would bless me a lot more if you just found a homeless person and put some shoes on his feet, put a brand new pair of shoes on his feet, or volunteered at a food bank and brought $1,000 worth of, food to give away, or paid an old lady's or an old widow's electric bill. Because he says in the book of Matthew, he says, by doing these things to them, you're doing that to me. You're paying the Messiah's electric bill. You're putting shoes on the Messiah's feet. And that's how he's going to, I think, judge us one day. Did you do these things? In the time that you've got left in this world, while all of this crazy stuff is going on, do those things. And I think you'll be rewarded for it one day. That's what I would tell people the most, is focus on those things. If you can focus on that stuff when everything else is going nuts, I think it's going to speak volumes about one day when you stand before the Father and he's going to say, well done, good and faithful servant. Did you actually participate in being a servant?
There's so many times, this reminds me of when in the Bible we see you're a captain of tens, 50s, hundreds, thousands. And it seems like these captains, they're not just randomly selected.
Yeah.
I mean, they have shown themselves to be responsible and be able to manage these people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's like that's part of what you're saying.
Before I started New to Torah, my prayer to him was, I got on my knees. And I think there's really something about going to prayer and being physically on your knees because it shows a physical humbleness. So I tell people to pray that way. But I went to him on my knees and I asked God, I don't care if I play the smallest part in your kingdom. Just let me play a part. I don't want to end my life without having been used by you. If there's a toolkit, if there's a toolbox, and I'm the smallest, most insignificant tool in the box, as long as you use me once, I'll have fulfilled my purpose because the master has picked me up and used me, and that's the greatest fulfillment I think I could get from life. So it's like, I tell people, do the same. Go out and be used by him. Even if it's small, even if the whole world thinks it's insignificant, at the time he uses you, he will think it's significant. And that's amazing to me.
I think he's used you, man. I think you know that at this point. And I know he is still using you. And so thank you for taking the time to do this and talk with us.
Absolutely.
It's It's always a pleasure. I hope that I see you before 8 years are over.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, come out. Your invitation is open anytime to come out.
Guys, I finally created a Patreon page. Why did I do it? So I can spend more time dedicated to this podcast and less time freelancing or building cabins, which is something that I've done. If you want to support what I'm doing, go to Patreon and support it. What will I give you as a patron? I will meet with you and have a drink with you once a month. I will sit down and meet with all the patrons and we'll all have a drink, or at least all be drinking. You could be having a cigar or you can just be drinking tea, whatever you want. But we'll talk about life, we'll talk about Torah, and it'll be a blast. So go ahead and sign up to my Patreon page so that we can spend more time making this podcast awesome. Thank you, everyone who isn't a patron and who is a patron. Thanks for watching this thing. We could not do this without you. So thanks.